accomplishments was their creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was formed after World War II as part of the Defense Act of 1947, a bill which also combined the departments of the Army, Navy, and Air Force under a new Department of Defense and created the National Security Council as well. This Defense Act was formulated by three longtime members of the CFR who also lobbied Congress for its passage. The first of these three men was James Forrestal, who served as the country's first Secretary of Defense. Harry Truman, who had succeeded FDR upon his death, was up for re-election at the time, and his opponent, CFR member Thomas Dewey, had been selected by the Council to succeed Truman. James Forrestal met with Dewey, and they had agreed that Forrestal would stay on as Defense Secretary after Dewey's election to the presidency. But to everyone's surprise, Dewey did not win. Truman did. This was maybe the only time since World War II that the Council on Foreign Relations did not control the outcome of a presidential election. They made sure it wouldn't happen again, however, for after Dewey's defeat, the Council has made sure that the presidential candidates from both parties were in their corner. Truman had ties to the mob, but was not a member of the Council. He soon fired James Forrestal. Forrestal was later admitted to Bethesda Hospital for psychiatric treatment, and soon after fell out of a 16-story window. The circumstances surrounding his so-called suicide are suspicious. Why he may have been killed is unknown. Before introducing the second of these three men, it will behoove us to first fill in some gaps regarding the militarization of Japan and the rise of communism. After financing the Rockefeller and Harriman empires, Jacob Schiff turned his attention to Japan and Russia. Russia had long been a thorn in the side of the international bankers. Tsar Alexander II had sided with Lincoln during the Civil War against them, and the Tsars had long refused to allow Western banking to take root in their country. So the bankers began formulating a plan to end Tsarist rule in Russia. The right-hand man of Jacob Schiff in this endeavor was an explorer and expert on Russian and Japanese affairs, a man by the name of George Kennan. In the 1880s, Kennan traveled to Siberia, which served as a sort of penal colony for political dissidents in Russia, and began writing articles for the Western press and giving lectures across the U.S. describing the deplorable conditions in the Tsar's labor camps. Influential Americans like Mark Twain reacted with horror and became ardent supporters of political change in Russia. Meanwhile, Jacob Schiff began funding Jewish revolutionaries led by Leon Trotsky, pursuant to orchestrating a coup d'etat in Russia. Schiff's grandson related later that the old man sank about 20 million for the final triumph of Bolshevism in Russia. Paul Warburg's younger brother Max, who ran the family bank headquarters in Hamburg, also helped fund Lenin and Trotsky. But before a coup in Russia would be attempted, the bankers saw another opportunity to weaken the Tsar, which involved Japan. There's just no way around it. In order to understand anything about Japan, you have to know what happened there in 1600. In that year, after centuries of fighting between dominant clans, a large battle took place at Sekigahara, in which over 150,000 samurai fought. During the fighting, several clans switched sides, and Tokugawa Ieyasu and his supporters won a decisive victory. Ieyasu subsequently moved his clan to Edo and united Japan under what is known as the Tokugawa shogunate, Tokugawa being the clan name, and shogunate meaning simply military rule. The emperor at this time became a figurehead. Three participants on the losing side at Sekigahara, the Mori, Shimazu, and Chosokabe clans, were ill-treated by Ieyasu and became bitter enemies of the Tokugawa. They would exact their revenge on the clan centuries later. Under the Tokugawa, Japan became a closed country. With the exception of the Dutch, who were given exclusive rights to trade with Japan through the port of Nagasaki, the country would remain off-limits to foreigners for the next 2.5 centuries. The Tokugawa clan maintained relative peace in Japan until 1853, when the American Admiral Perry showed up on its shores with a fleet of 4 black-hulled warships and demanded Japan open its borders to foreign trade, or else. Japan went into a panic. Fearful of an attack by these strange people with their modern weapons, the Tokugawa decided to appease Perry. This set off civil war in the country, for the Western clans saw this as a chance to topple the shogunate. They rallied their supporters under the cry, "Expel the barbarians, reinstate the emperor." Ironically, during the subsequent bloody conflict over what to do about the foreigners, both sides employed the support of the West, hoping to get the upper hand. France supported and sold weaponry to the shogunate, while Britain supported and sold weapons to the Western clans. After much bloodletting, the Tokugawa shogunate threw in the towel, and Emperor Meiji, a 16-year-old boy at the time, moved the imperial house to Edo and assumed power. Edo was renamed Tokyo. The newly restored emperor did not kick out the foreigners as his supporters had advertised. On the contrary, the Meiji government went on a modernization binge, building railways, factories, power plants, and warships as fast as they could. Military advisors were brought to Japan from Britain, France, and even Germany. Then Japan started flexing its new military might in Asia, fighting and winning a war with China. This made Russia nervous, and tensions were raised again when Japan signed a military alliance with Britain. Finally, in 1904, Japan attacked and declared war on Russia. Jacob Schiff immediately went into action, arranging loans to support Japan's war effort. Money poured in from Kuhn and Loeb, M.M. Warburg, Deutsche Bank, and the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, which had been set up by the British after the Opium Wars. Not only did Schiff make sure Japan got all the money it needed, he used his influence to see that Russia got none. Japan's decisive victory over Russia surprised the world. It was no secret that powerful Western business interests exploited Japan's eagerness to modernize and her thirst for conquest to attack Tsarist Russia. Political cartoons of the day attest to this. Jacob Schiff even bragged about it. John Hammond was quoted in the New York Times commenting on Schiff's boastful statement that the money of Jewish bankers had made it possible for Japan to wage a successful war against Russia. George Kennan boasted about his role in taking down the Tsar as well. He arrived in Japan in 1904 just as the war was getting underway, and with the permission of the Meiji government, distributed anti-Tsarist propaganda to Russian prisoners of war. He was later quoted as saying that, as a result, 50,000 Russian officers and men went back to their country ardent revolutionists. Yet another straw was laid across the Tsar's back. In 1908, Jacob Schiff led a campaign to force then-President Taft to abrogate the U.S.'s long-standing trade agreement with Russia. Skeptics often submit that Jacob Schiff's campaign to topple the Tsar was merely a private crusade, but this is clearly not the case. In 1915, the American International Corporation was formed. On its board of directors sat some of the top financiers of the day, Percy Rockefeller, his brother-in-law James A. Stillman, and the president of E.H. Harriman's Southern and Union Pacific Railroads, Robert S. Lovett, all directors at National City Bank of New York. The company's founder was National City Bank's president, Frank Vanderlip, one of the 7 attendees at Jekyll Island. Other AIC directors included Otto Kahn of Kuhn and Loeb, Pierre DuPont, and the great-grandfather of George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker. The American International Corporation worked closely with another important company, Guarantee Trust of New York. Guarantee Trust had been built up on the Rockefeller, Whitney, Vanderbilt, and Harriman fortunes, but by 1915, J.P. Morgan held controlling interest. Guarantee Trust's list of directors was impressive as well. It included George F. Baker, Charles H. Allen, Rothschild Representative August Belmont, Harry Payne Whitney, and J.P. Morgan partner Thomas Lamont. The bank's vice president was Harold Stanley, who would go on to co-found the Morgan Stanley Investment House. In short, the bulk of American wealth and power was represented on the boards of these two companies. Together, they would eventually control dozens of multinational corporations operating around the globe. But in 1915, their first order of business was to pick up where Jacob Schiff left off and, in the final years leading up to the Russian Revolution, see to it that Lenin and Trotsky's Bolsheviks had all the backing they needed. Finally, in 1917, Tsar Nicholas II, weakened by George Kennan's propaganda campaign, humiliating defeat at the hands of the Japanese, and catastrophic involvement in World War I, fell to the Bolsheviks. The Tsar and his family were killed in a house in Yekaterinburg. Communism was born. How surprising that the second architect of the Defense Act of 1947 turns out to be George Kennan's cousin, twice removed, George F. Kennan. If you are confused by the fact that the CIA and their arch nemesis, Communist Russia, were created essentially by the same people, don't be. The Central Intelligence Agency was never designed to fight the spread of communism, safeguard democracy, or anything like that, despite the fact that the communist threat provided the justification for practically everything the agency did up until the fall of the Soviet Union. In truth, the CIA was created to do a very simple, specific job, a job to which intelligence gathering is merely incidental. Now, before introducing the third architect of the Defense Act of 1947, we really need to answer a few questions. which are undoubtedly nagging at you by now. What is it that the CIA was really designed to do? What is the real agenda of the bankers and organizations like the CFR? And what did Ford Foundation President Rowan Gaither mean when he said, as quoted by Norman Dodd,
"We shall use our grant-making power so to alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union."
And finally, who are these people? Is there a so-called Jewish conspiracy, as some conspiracy theorists claim? And what about that other group often accused of trying to run the world, the Freemasons? Do they play a role in any of this? We can answer all of these questions, and more. But there's a little more digging we'll have to do first, so grab your shovel. When Tokugawa Ieyasu granted exclusive trading privileges to the Dutch, he wasn't forming an alliance so much with Holland as with the Dutch East India Company, which set up their first trading outpost in Asia just after Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara. The Dutch East India Company and its main competitor, the British East India Company, were the first multinational corporations. They wielded the power of sovereign nations on the seas and generated tremendous profits plundering the far corners of the world. When people think of these outfits, they think of spices, and while it is true that the Dutch and British East India Companies imported spices and tea from the east to the west, the most lucrative part of their business was the opium trade. A Dutch West India Trading Company was also formed to profit from the lucrative slave trade in the Americas. To put it bluntly, much of what these trading companies engaged in was licensed piracy. Another interesting fact about these trading companies is that they were dominated by Freemasons, from the investors and governors down to the ship's captains. This is evident